One of the largest earthquakes in American history rang church bells more than 1,000 miles away. The river flowing beside the nation's capital is legally controlled by another state. And somewhere along the East Coast, horseshoe crabs still gather every spring in a ritual they have been performing for 450 million years, unchanged since before the dinosaurs existed. These are 25 facts that prove the East Coast runs a lot deeper than most people realize. Subscribe to Wild States Facts before we start. Fact 1. New Hampshire has just 18 miles of Atlantic shoreline. That is the shortest ocean-facing coastline of any coastal state in the country. Wedged tightly between Maine and Massachusetts, the state barely reaches the Atlantic at all. And yet within those few miles sits generations of seafaring history, colonial heritage, and coastal tradition that most states with far longer coastlines can't match. Fact 2. Long Island is completely surrounded by water, but according to a 1985 Supreme Court ruling, it is not legally an island. The court determined it should be classified as a peninsula because of its connection to the mainland through the East River, which was considered too narrow to count as a true maritime divide. The case was really about legal control over the Long Island Sound. The geographical classification was the side effect. Fact 3. The Outer Banks of North Carolina are moving. The barrier islands shift westward by roughly 5 feet every year as waves erode the eastern shoreline and new sand builds along the western edge. Historic lighthouses have already been relocated hundreds of feet inland to prevent them from collapsing into the ocean. The ground where you place your beach chair today may not exist in the same location a century from now. Fact 4. The Great Dismal Swamp stretches across the Virginia and North Carolina border, and beneath its dense canopy of cypress and black gum trees, an extraordinary chapter of American history unfolded. Escaped enslaved people established isolated communities deep in the swamp, surviving there for decades beyond the reach of roads and slave catchers. This was not a temporary hiding place. People built homes, raised families, and lived entire lives in terrain so hostile that few outsiders dared enter. Fact 5. South Carolina has roughly 187 miles of direct Atlantic coastline. But once you trace every tidal creek, marsh edge, estuary, and inlet, the total tidal shoreline expands to more than 2,800 miles. The Low Country doesn't simply border the ocean, it blends into it through an intricate maze of marshes and waterways that stretches far deeper into the landscape than any straight map line could show. Fact 6. Cape Hatteras extends far into the Atlantic from the North Carolina coast, and just offshore, the warm Gulf Stream collides with the cold Labrador Current, creating shifting shoals and dangerous conditions that sailors call the graveyard of the Atlantic. More than 5,000 vessels are believed to have sunk here over the centuries. The same currents that doomed those ships are still colliding in the same place today. Fact 7. The Mason-Dixon line is remembered as one of the most politically charged borders in American history, the divide between North and South, free states and slave states. But it was originally surveyed in the 1760s to settle a property dispute between two colonial families, the Penns and the Calverts, who had spent years arguing over where their territories ended. Two English surveyors drew a line to solve a real estate conflict. History turned it into something else entirely. Fact 8. The Appalachian Mountains are so ancient they existed before the dinosaurs. Their origins stretch back more than 480 million years to a time when complex life on land had barely begun. At their peak, they may have stood as tall as the modern Himalayas. What you see rolling past a car window today is not the mountains themselves. It is what remains after hundreds of millions of years of erosion have worn them down to their roots. Fact 9. Mount Mitchell in North Carolina rises to 6,684 feet, the highest point anywhere east of the Mississippi River. Temperatures near the summit are cold enough that snow has been recorded in every month of the year. The landscape up there shifts into dense spruce fir forest, wrapped in mist, closer in feel to northern Canada than to the American South. Fact 10. Georgia's coastline is defined by enormous tidal salt marshes stretching between the mainland and the barrier islands, so wide and complex that the islands beyond them feel genuinely isolated, even though the mainland is relatively close. From space, the Georgia coast doesn't appear as a clean line between land and sea. It looks like the two are slowly blending together into one enormous living landscape. Fact 11. Georgia's Okefenokee Swamp covers nearly 700 square miles of dark water, dense cypress forest, and carnivorous plants, and parts of its interior remain genuinely difficult to access. Black bears roam through the wetlands. Alligators move beneath the blackwater surface. Sandhill cranes and insect-trapping sundews thrive in a habitat that has changed very little over time. In an East Coast landscape where most land has been developed or fully mapped, the Okefenokee still resists. Fact 12. Delaware's northern border is a curved line, literally the arc of a circle drawn by colonial surveyors in 1701, centered on the town of Newcastle. Instead of following rivers, ridges, or straight survey lines, the boundary curves across the landscape in a way that creates awkward overlaps with Pennsylvania that still confuse mapmakers today. Delaware is the only state in the country with a curved border of this kind. Fact 13. The Hudson River doesn't simply flow south. Along a 153-mile stretch between New York City and Troy, it behaves as a tidal estuary. The ocean pushes salt water upstream twice each day against the river's freshwater flow. More than 100 miles from the Atlantic, the current can visibly reverse direction when the tide rolls in. The Mohican people described it as the river that flows both ways. The name still fits. Fact 14. Where rivers crossing the eastern Piedmont drop from hard Appalachian rock onto softer coastal plain sediment, they once plunged over rapids and waterfalls in a geological boundary called the Fall Line. Early settlers built mills beside those falls. Towns grew around the mills, and eventually cities rose over the same ground. Many of those original waterfalls were simply built over as the cities expanded. Beneath the streets of Richmond and Washington, the rivers are still breaking over the same ancient rock ledges they always have. Fact 15. Every spring, horseshoe crabs emerge from Delaware Bay and crawl onto beaches to spawn. They have been performing this same ritual for roughly 450 million years, long before the dinosaurs existed and before forests covered the land. These animals survived the asteroid impact that ended the Cretaceous, along with multiple other mass extinction events. Stand on those beaches during spawning season, and you are watching one of the oldest repeated behaviors in the animal kingdom. Fact 16. Much of Boston's modern shoreline didn't exist when the city was founded. Over centuries, Bostonians filled in more than 5,000 acres of tidal flats and harbor water to expand beyond the original narrow peninsula. Entire neighborhoods like Back Bay were once part of the Atlantic. Logan Airport stands on land created entirely by human engineering. In many parts of downtown Boston, the ground beneath your feet used to be underwater. Fact 17. Cape Cod was formed roughly 18,000 years ago when a retreating glacier dumped sand, gravel, clay, and boulders along the Massachusetts coast. Unlike landscapes built on solid bedrock, the entire peninsula is essentially a pile of loose glacial sediment. The Atlantic has been steadily reclaiming it ever since. Parts of the outer shoreline erode by several feet every year. Scientists expect large portions of Cape Cod could disappear beneath the ocean within the next 1,000 years. Fact 18. The Chesapeake Bay stretches nearly 200 miles and drains a watershed spanning 6 states, making it the largest estuary in the United States. Despite its size, the bay averages only about 21 feet deep. That shallowness is what makes it so productive. Sunlight reaches much of the bay floor, supporting the underwater grasses that anchor the entire food web. Everything from blue crabs to migratory birds depends on a body of water that is, for most of its length, not much deeper than a swimming pool. Fact 19. Much of New York Harbor, the waterway that turned Manhattan into a global center of trade and immigration, legally falls under the jurisdiction of New Jersey. Colonial-era boundary agreements placed key harbor waters and shipping channels on the New Jersey side. New York got the skyline and the global reputation. New Jersey quietly retained control over much of the water beneath it all. Fact 20. New Jersey is the most densely populated state in America, with more people per square mile than India. And yet, right in the middle of all that development, roughly 90 minutes from Times Square, more than 1 million acres of nearly untouched forest somehow survived. The Pine Barrens are a landscape of pitch pine woods, cedar swamps, sandy soil, and tea-colored streams. Carnivorous plants grow in the wetlands. In one of the most crowded regions on Earth, this place remains genuinely wild. Fact 21. Assateague Island stretches along the Maryland and Virginia coast, split by a state border that the wild ponies roaming its beaches completely ignore. Like most Atlantic barrier islands, Assateague is constantly changing shape. Storms reshape the dunes, tides shift the shoreline, and the entire island migrates slowly westward over time. The political boundary on the map looks permanent. The land beneath it is always moving. Fact 22. The Hudson Canyon off the New Jersey coast is a massive submarine valley carved into the Atlantic seafloor that rivals the Grand Canyon in scale. From the beaches and boardwalks above, the ocean appears calm and featureless. Just offshore, the seafloor drops from around 600 feet to more than 6,000 feet over a short distance, forming underwater cliffs and canyons that almost nobody ever sees. Millions of people live along this coastline, entirely unaware of what lies beneath the surface. Fact 23. The Chesapeake Bay owes its existence partly to a meteor strike. Roughly 35 million years ago, an impact created a crater nearly 85 kilometers wide, now buried beneath the modern bay. Rivers flowed into the depression, sea levels rose, and the Atlantic flooded the basin, eventually forming the largest estuary in the United States. Beneath all that water and history lies the scar of a cosmic collision that predates every human settlement on this continent by tens of millions of years. Fact 24. Maine is the only state in the contiguous United States that shares a border with just one other state, New Hampshire. Everything else around it is Canada and the Atlantic Ocean. Maine's coastline, when measured by every inlet, cove, harbor, and offshore island, exceeds 3,400 miles, roughly 4 times the length of California's Pacific coast. On a flat map, Maine looks like a small corner of the country. In reality, it is vast, heavily forested, and more deeply indented than almost any other landscape in the lower 48. Fact 25, and the one that completely changes what you thought you knew about who first reached America. Decades before Jamestown in 1607 and Plymouth in 1620, the Spanish had already built a functioning colonial capital on the South Carolina coast. Its name was Santa Elena, founded in 1566 on Paris Island. For a time, it served as the capital of Spanish Florida, with fortifications, government officials, churches, and a population numbering in the thousands. It was eventually abandoned and forgotten. Archaeologists later rediscovered it buried beneath the grounds of the Paris Island Marine Corps Golf Course, one of the earliest European cities in North America, hidden in plain sight the entire time. That is 25 facts that prove the East Coast is running a lot deeper than most people realize. If one of these changed how you see the region, tell me which one in the comments. I read every single one. And if wild, real geography is your thing, subscribe to Wild States Facts, where I am covering every state, one wild fact at a time. See you in the next one.